Right, so as we discussed, there's a couple of models that we need to also create in order to get the system up and running. So I'm going to quickly show you the login page again and show you the error that we were getting. Well, you weren't seeing the error that we were getting because I've suppressed that. I'm going to unsuppress it again and show you one more time what it's asking for. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a couple of models. I'm not going to go too much into what those models going to be doing because they're going to be future videos, but it is going to be stuff like the role model, user role model, because these are all sort of like linked from a database point of view. We got different relationship, like many to many relationship on one to many relationship going on. So in order to sort of like create our login system, we also need to create these models because internally what's happening is that internally these systems are being looked at. In order for one to work, we need to have the others as well. So I'm going to show you this error again, and then we're going to go ahead, we're going to create these models, and then we're going to try and wrap up logging in successfully and displaying the information from the session once we're logged in. So to change my screen again, so you can see that we've got our login form. We hit login, um, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. So I'm going to go and unsuppress that error, and so you can see what that message was displaying. So and that's in the core directory again. I'm going to source, auth, going to roles, privileged user. I'm going to uncomment that and go back to my browser screen. We're going to reload, and right away you can see that what is showing that we need that user role model, right? So we must create these other models, and along with the models we have to also create the entity, because if we've got a model which is a representation of a database table, then we also need to create an entity only if that model is going to have data that we can post from a form or something like that. If not all models are going to have an entity, because we're going to have some models that only job is to do certain things internally, while other model might have got a form that we're submitting from the front end or the back end. That's what we use the entity for, to do all the sanitization of those input fields, right? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create these models and create the entities for them and just quickly explain to you what they're doing. I might also show you the database where the information is stored, and you can see what information that we're storing within these models. So I'm going to quickly create these models and then explain a little bit about what they're doing. So back into my editor, I'm going to go to our app directory. I'm going to go to models. Let's create those first. And I'm going to create role model. I'm also going to create user role model. And I'm going to create a role permission model. Just like so. And as I'm saying, all models, once you've done one, they're pretty much going to be the same across any file. So I'm pretty much going to just copy and paste what we've got in our first set of models that we've created into our new model classes. So I'm just going to grab the content from this one, copy that, let's close that, let's paste this into here. Right, I'm just going to rename it to reflect the name of the class. So this is role permission model, and we must also change the entity, right? So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to say role permission entity. We haven't created these classes yet, but we're going to be doing them in a minute. Let's fix this up just like so. Let's get the other one, role model, paste that in, role model. Let's change the entity as well to role entity, right? And the last one is going to be user role model. Paste that in, user role model, and we're going to change the entity as well to user role entity, just like so. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to be creating these entity class within our entity directory. So we're going to create a new file. It's called role entity, and then we're going to have our role permission entity. So it's going to be role permission entity, and the last one is going to be user role entity, just like so. I'm going to copy the content of one that we've already created. I'm going to paste, let's paste it into user role entity first. Let's change the name, user role entity. Let's close that. Role permission entity. Let's close that. And our role entity. Change the name. Let's close that. Now we'll go on. Now we need to go on fix up the namespace within our model class to reflect these entity class that we've just created. So within our role model entity, we're going to grab that, copy that, we're going to paste this right here, because that's the namespace, which is app entity role permission entity, which reflects the role permission model, right? User role model, so we're going to copy this as well. We're going to paste that right there. And the last one, which is role entity, we're going to paste this right there, just like so. And that should be that. So what we're going to do now we've created these entity, what these are part of the role-based access control system that is also built in and linked to our user model. So that's the reason why we had to create these particular classes, so internally our core functions, our core scripts can read the information coming from these particular database. And as I'm saying that, I also need to change the table schema within our models, which I haven't done. So table schema for our user role model is going to be user role, because that is the name of the database table for this particular model. So also need to change it for role model, which is going to be roles, and role permission, which is simply going to be role permission, just like so. So these are all part of the role-based access control, hence the reason why we need to create them, so internally our script can fetch the necessary information from the databases, right? So I want to quickly show you these tables in the database and show you what they contain, right? So I'm going to change my screen again. Let's try and load up our database right here and go into Lava CMS, which is what it's called. I've got a lot of tables in here which we're not, well, is what I'm using to develop this system, but we're only sort of like looking at the permission roles, user role permission table, so I can explain to you the content that they contain. So let's get our roles table first. So the role table simply contains all the different roles that we can create within our application. So we have got the ability in the backend to actually create as much roles as we need, and then we could modify it. We could do whatever. It's a pretty much it's a CRUD model that we can do any sort of CRUD operation on, right? So we can create our own edit, delete, and again, yeah, it's all very CRUD based, and we've got the ability to do all of that. So you can see we'll log in the created that time, and we'll log in the modified time. So if we modify that particular role, it will create a timestamp for us, right? So that's pretty much what the roles table does. It allows us to create as much roles as we want within our system. And same goes for our permission table. So we get permissions right here. We can, again, same thing as roles, we can create as much permission as we want, and we can assign as much permission as we want to any particular role or multiple roles, right? So that's the two models that we've got in our code that we've just created classes for. Other ones are role permission, and the role permission is a pivot table between roles and permission. So essentially what we're doing is, you can see role ID, which is super admin. It's got the permission of admin access. As a matter of fact, you can see that we've got all the role ID of 1, which is super admin, has got all these permissions assigned to it, right? So we've got the ability to also do that from the backend. We can assign any permission to any role, and we can also disassociate any permission from any role. So we've got all the ability that we're going to be implementing in the backend, so we can do all this ourselves as well. So that's the role permission table, and that's what it does. It's a pivot table that links the role table together and the permissions table together. And the next one we've got our users table, and this is the biggest table that we've got in our database so far, because it's got quite a few columns. You can see all the information that we're taking in, like ID, first name, last name, email, gravatar, status, all different password fields, etc. We got stuff like activation token. So when a user registers on your site, they get sent an activation token, and only then we can use that activation token to actually verify the user and change their status to active, right? So we can do all of that, and we're also given the ability to sort of like delete or soft delete users, but not like completely deleting them from the database. We can turn the deleted at flag, deleted at flag. We can turn that on, and essentially what that's going to do is that's going to take that particular record from our view table and put it somewhere else, like in a trash. So from the trash, you can then go and delete it permanently. But it gives you the option to do that, so we're not sort of like deleting stuff accidentally, because once you do that, you can't reverse that process, right? So we got stuff like fail logins. We log in those as well. So that's our users table. Then we got our user role table, which is also our next pivot table, which links our users table to our roles table. And this is how we're able to assign a user a role or many roles, right? So we also have the ability to do that in the back. When we come to implement our backend, we've got this full RBCA control over our roles and our users, so we can assign any user any role with a list of permissions of stuff they can and can't do within the backend. So I just want to put a bit of context on that, so we're not so like confused on what's going on. So I'm going to go back to our application. I'm going to go back to our login form again, and I'm going to unsuppress that error. I think that error should still be on, right? So if I click this login button, you're gonna see we're no longer getting that message. We're no longer getting that message that we were getting before. In fact, I think it's logged us in, but we also need to implement other steps to do all the redirect and the flash message for us, which is something we're also going to be doing in this particular video. And I'm going to verify that it has just logged us in by opening up our template. I'm going to var dump the session, and we're going to see the information that it's actually providing us through the session. So I'm going to bring it back into my editor. I'm going to close all of these down for the time being. So I'm going to get the template that displays this. I'm going to get the home template actually. I'm going to go to the home page, and we're going to var dump out that session. So templates, client, home, index, and we're going to say square bracket, %, square bracket, to say var dump session, just like so. Can you see my screen? I should increase my font size 1 minute so you can see what I'm seeing properly. Right, so I'm pretty much var dumping out this session to our home page, and we're going to see what information it contains. So go back to the browser again. We go into reload, right, and nothing should happen, but I'm going to take you back to the home page and see. Let's get that right actually. And you can see we've got a bunch of information that's now displayed on the screen from the session that we've just put in within our template. And you can see we've got quite a lot of information right here. So let's try and look at the source and see what information that we're getting back. We're getting back quite a lot of information, which but what we're trying to look at is the user ID down here, which says 1. It's logging the last time that we log in and using a Unix time, which we have to then convert to human readable time, which we're already doing within the framework, so no need to worry about that. And it's also setting this is login flag to true. So we know that we've now logged in and we've got a active session. But I'm going to actually remove this session by doing view cookie information. I can't do it from the source. Let's do it from the page itself. View cookie information. I'm going to delete, and this is a session, the cookie that it's created once we logged in with that session. We're going to just delete that and reload, and you can see the information just went. We only got basic session that we're displaying globally by default, which is your browser, user agent, stuff like that, right? That's going to always be there regardless. So if I go back to the login page again and click on that login button, we've logged in. Let's go back to our home page, and you can see we've got a much smaller session which shows stuff like, again, it's simply going to show our ID and the boolean flag is set to true, right? We've got stuff like the token from our login form, but obviously we don't want to be, that's not what we want to be doing. We want to log in properly and have it redirect us to wherever we set. Like that could be login to a profile account or login back to the last requested page or login to your admin panel. But for the time being, we're just going to log in and have it redirect us back to our own page, right? So that is working. We verify that a session has been created once we've logged in. It's just not redirecting us, which we have not yet implemented, right? So I'm going to kill that session again. View cookie, I'm going to delete it. I'm going to go back to the login page again. Let's reload that. That's gone. To the login page again. And I'm going to incorrectly put in mess up my password. And you're going to see that it's not logging us in. It's giving us an error. So if we go back to the home page again, you can see we've not got a successful login. We've got some session information regarding the token, but we've not got that user ID, nor that is login flag. We've not got that because we have not successfully logged in. We've created an error, right? Or we've got an error logging in. So let's reload that or clear our session again. Back to our login page. Right, so now that we've done that, we've able to log in successfully. We need to handle all of that redirect properly. Now I'm going to take it back to the editor and I'm going to close this down. Actually, there's something I want to show you before I do that. So when we're dumping out sessions, right, we can dump out other information which I want to show you. So I'm going to actually get rid of this session and I'm going to say privilege user. And privilege user is a variable that we've defined within the base controller which returns an object of that current user along with the ID, their names, email, and all the permissions and roles that that particular user has got. Now, I'm logging in with a particular user account which has got an ID of 1, which is what you were seeing before. So I'm going to actually dump this out on the screen when I log in, and I will show you all the information that it's bringing back, right? So I'm going to bring it back to the browser. I'm going to hit login, and I'm going to go to the home page, because remember, we're still not redirecting properly at this point. Back to the home page, and you can see we're no longer displaying a array. We're now displaying or dumping an object, which is coming from that privileged user variable, right? So if I go into source, so you can see a little better, you can see that we're now outputting the actual role of the user, which is super admin, because that user is linked to a role of super admin. And it also gives you an array of all the permissions that that role contains. Now, the user doesn't contain these permissions, the role contains those permissions, but the user is assigned to that particular role, which means they've got these permissions to do all of these stuff within the backend of the application, right? And you can also see we're displaying stuff like the user ID again, but only this time we're sort of like also displaying email, first name, last name, a full name, which is not a column in the database. This is simple a key that I have put in, and I've concatenated the first name and last name together, so we can then get the full name just like so. And we also output in a gravatar if the user account or email supports the gravatar feature. We can get that as well. And we also output in their status, because the status is also important, is how we check at the login stage if that user account is active. If it's not, then it won't log you in, right? So we're displaying these because they're relevant to what we want to do before we log someone in, especially the status, right? So that's what the privileged user variable contains, and we have access to that variable in any of our templates, so we can fetch all these information within our template to display stuff how we want to display it. So I just wanted to show you that before we moved away, so you can see that we actually are logged in, and we're actually getting that object back from the database with all the roles and permissions. So let's close that. I'm going to kill the session again. And don't worry, we're also going to be implementing our login system as well, which is going to do this for us without us going through this process of killing the session. So to reload, that's going to go. It's going to say Boolean is false because we've killed that session, and even though it wasn't returning a session array, it's returning an object. That object is based on that session being set, right? So that's the reason why it's now saying false, because we've destroyed that session, and which means we've logged out and there's nothing to display. So I'll take you back to my editor and close this down. So what we also need to do now is to implement or redirect, right? And how I am doing redirect is I am delegating that process to my action, my event dispatching, right? So you might have noticed that we've implemented this class login action event, but we've not yet touched onto it, right? We created this class within our event directory, which is a simple class which extends into the base action event, which is going to give us 3 methods, which is going to give us the name of the method that fires that event, the object that method is in, and is also going to give us the context that that method is returning, right? And in our case, this is the method, this is the name that the method is in, is the security controller. The context is going to be the entire user object that's going to be dispatched, so we can use any of our listeners can subscribe to that particular context, and we can do stuff onto it. We can do stuff different stuff like login or displaying or logging info to database. We can track a user logging in, or we can track a user logging out. We can do whatever. It's up to you what you want to do with that particular context of information, right? So we've created that login action event, and it's simply going to provide a name of this particular event, and it's going to be a unique name which uniquely identifies this particular event. So we can use this name using a as listeners method to check if this event exists, and we can also do stuff based on when this event is fired, right? So this by itself doesn't do anything. The next step that we need to do is we need to create our subscribers, which is going to subscribe to this particular event and do some stuff onto it. So I'm going to create a new directory within our app directory called event subscribers. So I'm going to say event subscriber, and the first class we're going to be creating is a login action subscriber class, right, which directly relates to our login action event class. So we're going to say login action subscriber, just like so. And what we're going to be doing right here, we're going to do all the bootstrapping like what we normally do. We're going to fill this class out, and I'm going to walk you through the different steps, the different elements to it. So the first thing we're going to be doing, as we normally do, is to declare our strict type, import our namespace, and actually using the class keyword to give our class a name. So we're going to say declare strict types, namespace is going to be app, and we're now within the event subscriber directory, just like so. And class is going to be login action subscriber, just like so. Let's spell that properly, to be login action subscriber. So there's also a interface that we must implement, and this will be the same interface that we're going to be implementing in any subscriber classes that we're going to be creating, and that is called event subscriber interface. So it's going to be event, I'm going to be implements event subscriber interface, and that is a class that is located within the event dispatcher core component within the core framework. And what this forces us to do is to return a method that's going to accept an array of listeners that's going to subscribe to the particular context that this event is going to be dispatching, right? And it's going to be a public static function called get subscribed events, right? And what this is going to do is going to allow us to return an array of all the listeners that's going to subscribe to this particular event, right? And all we do that is we use the return keyword, just like so, and we're going to return arrays of subscribers, and within those arrays we can also specify the priority of when those listeners execute their action, right? So I'm going to bring in the actual event that we're going to be executing our listeners on. So I'm going to say login action event, right, just like so, and I'm going to say name because that's the unique identifier for this particular event. So these listeners going to only execute this code on this unique event, just like so. And we're going to say that's going to be assigned to an array, just like so. So we're going to then create our listeners within this particular array using another internal array, just like so. So for example, we can define a method that we're going to be creating within this particular class, and the naming doesn't really matter. It could be whatever name you want to give it, right? But make sure it makes sense to what you're doing, so you can easily sort of like identify what the method is doing. So we could say on login, on login, that's the name of the method, right? We could also say we want this to be executed, say for instance first or second, so we can define these by numbers. Like the lower the number, then the higher up is going to execute. If I use a negative number, it means that that's going to be executed at very last. That's the last thing that's going to get executed. Like could say minus 1,000, and we know this is going to be executed at the very end, right? But for the most part, you could leave it without the number, and the order in which you define your method is the order is going to actually execute. That is also allowable as well. So we're going to be creating a method called flash login event, right? Very descriptive. So it's going to be a public function, and also your method must be a public method within our subscriber class. It just has to be a public method. So it's going to be flash login event. And what the flash login event is going to do is we're going to be implementing a method within a class within our core event dispatcher component, and that's a trait. It's not a class, it's a trait that's got some helper function that's going to help us redirect and display a flash message, right? So I'm going to implement or import that trait class, that trait in, and we're going to use a method within that trait which is going to help us do the redirect. And the reason why I've implemented a trait for this is because that's pretty much how I'm doing redirect within this entire application through event, right? So it made sense to create a common function that is going to do the work, and all we need to do is to just implement that function or method and pass in the relevant argument and just let that method do the work, right, throughout all of our subscriber classes. So it's going to say use event dispatcher trait, right? That's the name of the trait that contains that method that we're going to be putting within this flash login event method. So the name of the method that we're going to be using from the trait is called flashing event. So we'll just say this flashing event, just like so, and that auto completes for us because we've imported this trait. So PHP Storm is helping us autocomplete the method that is located within this particular trait. Now, this method takes in two arguments. It takes in the first argument is going to be the object, the event object that we want to be calling on, and the second argument is going to be a closure for which we can return whatever we want to return. And we're going to be making use of the second argument to implement that redirect. But in other cases, like other classes, we won't need to use that second argument because the redirect will happen for us automatically. I just want to show you the different ways we can go about doing that. But for our login script, we're going to be implementing that second argument to do the redirect for us, or to help do the redirect. But in other parts of our system, we will only need to pass in that first argument, right? Because that will be the only required argument. And it's the only required argument. The second argument is completely optional. So the first argument that it wants is the event action or the event object. And how do we get that in? We get that in by passing in that event as the argument for the method. And this is also important. Any listeners, because these are effectively listeners, right? So any listeners that we create, we must pass in that event object as the argument, because that's the only way we're going to get access to the method, the context, and the the actual object that is implementing that event, which is our security controller. So I'm going to type into it as well. So it's going to be a login action event, just like so, and I'm going to say event. Now this variable now contains that login action event object, and we now got access to those three methods that I mentioned. So I'm going to pass in this event argument as the first argument to our flashing event, and I'm going to use the second argument to implement the redirect. So I'm going to put this on a new line, and I'm going to do a closure. And a closure is effectively a function within a function, right? Just like so. Just like so. So what exactly are we going to be implementing? We're going to be using our event object to locate some method within our base controller to do the redirecting for us, right? So this closure by default it comes by default with two arguments, which is going to be the current event and a action route, which is a sort of like a an optional argument. It's an optional argument, so we're not going to be using that second arg. We're going to be declaring it because we have to declare it, but we're not going to be using it. But in other cases, we are going to be using it, right? So we're going to describe this one as callback event, and we're going to describe the other one as action routes, right? So you notice that we've got CB event, but we've not got that defined within this particular function, this flash login event. That's because we're not actually doing that. What's happening is that this closure already get past those two arguments, so we have to list them out right here, which this CB event is the same as this event. It's just internally we're already passing in these events as the arguments for our closure. If that wasn't the case, we could have used the use statement, and we could take in that event as the argument, which we can then use within this actual function. But because we're already doing that internally, we don't need to pass the actual event object in, because we already got use of it internally. So I've named it callback event just to distinguish that we're not actually using this particular event. We're using an event that's already passed to this closure internally, and I will show you that actually in a bit. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be saying CB event, we're going to be saying get object, and the get object method is the actual controller, the security controller. So we can then call any methods within that controller and its parent controller to help us do some stuff. And the method that we're going to be calling is redirect, just like so. So we call the redirect method, which takes in an argument, what we're going to be redirecting to. So we're going to be relying on another class to help us redirect back to where the user is coming from, right? And that class is going to be our authorized class, and we want the method get return to page, right? Just like so. So once we do that, once we log in, effectively we should be able to then get a redirect back to our home page if that's where we were coming from. If we were coming from a different part of the site and we hit that login button and we log in, it would then redirect us back to that particular page, right? But because we've only got two pages working with now, it's just going to redirect us back to the home page if that is where we're coming from, right? And that's pretty much all we're going to be doing. And obviously we must pass the name in to our get subscriber event method, because this is the event that we're going to be, or this is the listener that we're going to be executing on this particular event, right? So this is the basic layout of any subscriber class. We must implement this event subscriber interface, and if we want to use the redirect method, we also must implement that trait, right? All these other classes that are brought in, like the authorize, is only going to be specific to the actual method that we're creating. In other classes, in other subscriber classes, we might not be using this authorized class, right? So we can implement or import any class that is relevant to what we're actually doing. And again, namespacing, that's dead important. We really must always get our namespacing right, and we must also import the actual login, the actual event that we're working on, because we must pass this within our return statement. We must fetch the unique name, right? The unique name of that event is where we're executing these methods on. So at this point, you're probably wondering if that's it. That's not it, because if I take you back to our browser and I reload, or I go to my login page and I log in again, you'll see that we're still not redirecting. That's because we need to also take a next step, which is to register this event subscriber class, right? So I'll take it back to my editor. And how do we do that, right? So we do that through our events.yaml file. So if I get my events.yaml file, which is going to be within our config directory, events, and I've deliberately cleared this out so I can go through all the steps with you guys so you can see how we go about doing this. So we need to register this particular subscriber that we've just created, right? So we're going to say services, which is going to be the main array, which is going to contain all of our subscribers and all of our listeners, but we're only sort of like working with subscribers. So I'm going to say, and again, when you do a YAML file, indentation is dead. It's a bit like Python. Indentation is important. If you don't indent it properly, it's going to throw an error, right? So we got our services, which is going to be the main array, right? Within that array, we're going to create a next array called subscribers, just like so. And within our subscriber array is where we're going to be registering all of our subscriber classes. So I'm going to uniquely name my security controller, or my login action subscriber. I'm going to give it a name of security.subscriber. So security.subscriber, just like so. Now we must also do the semicolon and then enter, and it will indent for us. If we're using PHP Storm or any other normal editor, it should indent properly for us. And this is where we're going to be defining all the elements of our security subscriber array, and we're going to be defining key value pairs, right? So the first key I'm going to define within our security subscriber array is the class key. And the class key, we need to bring in or define the namespace of our login action subscriber class that we've just created. So I'm going to say backtick, I'm going to say app backtick event subscriber backtick, and it's going to be called login action subscriber, just like so, right? That is effectively all we need to register our login action subscriber to our internal framework, which is going to register it, recognize it, and it's going to allow the method to be fired, right? So we can test this out. Save it. Let's go back to our own page now. Let's go back to our own page. Let's reload. Right. So we did click the login button, so effectively we are logged in, but we're going to go ahead and clear that session. So let's go back to our home page. We're going to clear this particular session, view cookie, delete, and we're going to go to our login page again, just like so. And once we log in, it should automatically redirect us back to where we were coming from. So I'm going to hit login, and we're getting some kind of error. So it's saying app event subscriber login action subscriber trailing routes return value must be type array, right? So what this is saying is that there are some other elements within that YAML file that we have to also implement, like we could register a feedback for the particular route that we're trying to redirect back onto, and this is what this error is displaying. And in the future going forward, actually I'm going to make this an optional stuff, so we're not getting errors like this, because we might not always want to define a message or a redirect path, right? So we're going to be making that optional. So at this point within our YAML file, if I switch my screen back, at this point within our YAML file, we won't be getting an error like what we've just got. So I'm going to actually fix that, and it's a pretty simple fix, and it's the next key within our security subscriber array, which is going to be register route feedback, and that's the name of the key, right? So that's how we reference what we're going to be registering. So I'm going to say semicolon, and underneath that we can specify a redirect, or we could also specify a message. But because we've already done the redirect in that callback function within our login action subscriber class, we're only going to specify a message. So I'm going to say MSG actually I must also specify, as I'm speaking, the actual class and method that we want to return that message on. So I'm going to say app controller, and it's going to be our security controller. Spell that properly. Colon index action, right? That's going to be semicolon again, and here is where we're going to be registering the message and a redirect, which is optional, but we're not going to be defining a redirect for what I've just said about us already implementing that. Just going to be returning a message. And also I'm going to be doing some refactoring on this right here, because I'm not 100%. I don't quite like this implementation of us having to have to define the entire controller. It might be a case of me just saying, creating a new syntax to represent this particular string, and it could be something like security dot, if I could spell security properly, security dot index dot action, maybe something like that, which is going to represent the string that we actually had before. But for the time being, that's not yet implemented, so we're going to be sticking to this particular string that we've got, and here we're going to be defining the message that we want to be output on this particular route. So we're going to say something like welcome, you are now logged in, something just like that. And we're going to go back to the browser, we're going to reload this page, and we're going to try that login again. So nothing's changed on here. We're going to hit the login button, and that should redirect us back to the home page. So hit login, and there you go, it redirects us back to our home page with the object that we already var dumping out in our template, right? So that's actually how I'm doing the login process. You notice that we had to import or create all the models to get this to work, but we never actually did nothing with those models apart from create them and set them up, reflecting the database that they are linked to, right? So that's a simple, well, simple for me because I built the thing. So I'm hoping that you guys are going to get what I'm doing, and I'm trying my best to explain all the ins and outs of how you go about implementing a login system using this particular framework that we've created. It's not like other system where we have to handle sessions and handle all other bits that comes with building a login form. We didn't even have to create no HTML because that is already being generated for us through our login form, our form builder component. And you can see we're using event dispatching to do all of our redirecting and all of our message. So you can also see that it displays that message that we've just also written within our YAML file. Welcome, you are now logged in. And because we've not got no CSS, we're not really seeing it within any kind of style. So you could, distinguish what a flash message is, because if I reload the page, it's going to disappear. So reload, you can see that it's gone. That's because that's a flash message and it's gone on a reload, right? So that is effectively our login system semi-complete, because now we are logging in and it's redirecting us back to a particular page. We can set the page that we want to be redirected back to, but it's automatically redirecting us back based on what we've defined within our action or login action subscriber. So if I take you back there again, so we could double check that, you can see we're logging in and we're redirecting back based on this class and this get return to page method, which uses sessions to store the page that we were coming from, the requested URL that we were coming from. So when we move to another page, we can then redirect back to the previous page where we're coming from, which is what this method is doing. And it's a method that is located within the authorize class, right? We're simple getting the object, the controller object. We call in the get object method, which contains a copy of the security controller object, and on that we can call our redirect method, right? We can do that. We could have also displayed that message in this method as well. We could have said something like cb event get object, and we could say something like flash message, because that is also a method within our base controller. So we could have done that right there as well, but we've chose to do it within our event dispatching class, our configuration file, and that's pretty much also all we register any events that we want to execute, right? So if I've got another event, for example, I will stay within my subscriber array and I will define a next one. Like, for example, if I got a user event, I could say user.subscriber, and then I could define the user action event class and do pretty much the same thing as we've done, and we could register all of the events that we've got within our application in this one events.yaml file under the subscriber keyword, right, within the service array. That's pretty much all we register any event that we create. If we don't register the event right here, it won't work, right? It has to be registered. So that's pretty much all we log in and all we redirect. So now we're going to look at middleware, because you notice that if I take you back to the browser, in a real life application, if we are already logged in and we hit that login route, we don't want to see that login form again. So if I say login again, you can see we're seeing that login form again, but we don't want that behavior, right? We want to be able to redirect the user away from that login form because they're already logged in. And for this process, I'm using middleware to do that for me. So that's pretty much what we're going to be exploring next.